Hello and welcome back to the channel. And this should be the last episode of the NodeJS API series. And in this episode, we will create the front-end part for our games list application, and we will connect it to, of course, our API with React and TypeScript. Two things, two small remarks here. The sound might be a little bit different because I'm using different settings in OBS, and well, we'll see how it goes. The second thing is I'm recording this standing in front of my desk. See whether it's gonna be, I don't know, maybe a little bit more dynamic, but nevertheless, let's get to it. So first things first, I am using Node 14.16.0. So that's one thing. Second thing, I had to do a small change to the backend code. You see, I added in our request listener from the last episode, I added all the return statements inside every if. This was due to the strange thing that actually we're here. So if I run this inside Windows Terminal, just npm run start. Yeah. If I get rid of this return statement, for example, here, and I will try to request it, I will get my data back, but then I also get this strange error right after end, which indicates that we try to write something to the response after we call the end method on it. So I didn't predict this happening, therefore have these return statements in these places. Okay, what I did inside of our folder, you can see there's a null catalog called frontend. So basically what I did was I just ran this command to bootstrap the React application named frontend with, of course, TypeScript that is creating that folder inside of our project folder. You might argue whether this should be moved to a separate folder and not living beside the NodeJS API, but for the purpose of the tutorial, I don't think that's something to consider really. So also someone commented that the light theme in VS Code is hurting the eyes. I can agree, therefore I switched to something darker. So now let's just switch to our front-end folder and run Visual Studio Code here. And since we're here, just go to the folder. We can run it as always with npm run start. That should run it. We don't need that. Okay, it is running, and let's close that, keep that. I should be able to see it running here. Wonderful. So let's shortly discuss what we'd like to achieve. We'll build a simple crude application with React and TypeScript. There will be basically two pages, the page with the list of the games, and then something you can call details or form page, where you can add or modify existing game entries in our API. So one thing to consider, we will need some kind of router. Well, for two pages, you can live without it and just switch this via JavaScript, but we'll use one, don't you worry. Just to keep things more on the aesthetic side, you know, I'm not a great guy when it comes to CSS. I will use Material UI to give the basic looks and feels to our app. And we'll use Axios to connect to our app and perform HTTP requests. So knowing that, I will split that terminal here just once. Come on. And here we can start adding stuff that we need. So we need npm install Axios and types for Axios. That's one. Then we need lots of stuff. We'll use Reach Router instead of React Router, just because it's a little bit newer and maybe API, in my opinion, is a little bit better. So let's check that out. Reach Router. Usage with TypeScript. Okay, cool. Let's add that. Looking at this makes me feel like we should have used Yarn. We still can. It should be a little bit faster than npm. Oh yeah. So how's your day? Everything good? Okay, we have that. So maybe try yarn add a reach router and pray that to be a little bit faster, and then we will add types for it. And then the last thing is adding the Material UI, which is the basic set of components that you can use for styling. The other are, for example, undesign or something like that. Okay, that should give us the types. And then we need Material UI core. So yarn add Material UI core. And I don't think this has a separate set of types. This should be built with TypeScript. So the types are inside the package. Okay, we're good. So let's see, that's that. And let's start by removing the stuff that we don't actually need. And the most part of the app TS6, this, come on, save. Yeah, now it's empty, and that's fine with me. So let's set up our router. It's gonna be rather easy, I hope. All we need is to import the router from reach router. Okay, and then we need to define the pages, the route that we'd like to use. So I'll create new folder and call it home. and I will create new folder and call it details. I always keep stuff separate by the modules, right? Not by the type. I don't tend to create the components and then pages, then I don't know, models, folders. I keep everything inside of its context. So here we'll create details.tsx and just fill it with nothing for now. And here we'll create home tsx, right? This is good. See, for now, can just write details here, and we'll write home here, and let's try get this link to our router. So with the home be one of the routes, and then details to be second. What we need to provide here is the path for which given component should render. This will be rendered for games with a game ID. So a few things here. This is a path for which given component should render. So when the user gets access to given URL, this component or this component should render for given URL. This game ID, of course, something, as you remember, example of the ID in our app is for escape from Tarkov. This is EFD, right? So this this will vary depending on the details of the game we'd like to display, and this is a URL parameter that we'll get. And that would work in, in pure JavaScript. The problem is we're using TypeScript, which has a drawbacks, as you can see too, and we have to redefine our props. So what we need for both is to extend our props with route component props. And now provide this here. This should work out of the blue. Here, thing is a little bit different because we have to extend this with route component props too, but we also have to specify the parameter from the URL that we'd like to choose, use, and make it optional. And this is going to be a string. And now this is looking good. So maybe let's get access to it here. And let's try rendering the parameter here. So this is looking good. Let's try checking it. Home renders properly. It has no parameter. Let's check for games games EFD. The parameter is passed properly. We can see it rendered on the screen. But we have to go a little bit further. And not only we will render details when the parameter is passed, but we will use the very same component because we will display a form when there's no parameter, right? So someone goes here. This means, add a comment here. No, I can't. How about, how do you, okay. Someone is trying to add a new game to a list. Someone is trying to modify existing game. And in one of these cases, there will be a game ID parameter. There will be not in the second case, right? So now if we try this, we should render something like, I believe, undefined or simply nothing. Okay, so we can test that game ID or add new game. Yeah, it's working really good. Okay, so we have our routes set up. So let's figure out how we can connect our API and display the games list for now. So the first thing to do. So we need to fetch the game list from our API, meaning we have to connect to it. So let's configure the connection to our API using Axios. I'll create a new folder here. I will call this maybe common because it will be shared between the modules, and I will create api.ts file. And here is my strategy when it comes to connecting to API. What I like to do is to create a class. I'm not a fan of object-oriented programming, but this is one case when it makes sense. I do create a class with static methods to manage my connection to API. So I will import from Axios two things that we need. So it will be all managed by Axios, but we'll add another layer that will help us. So let's create a class, call it API. Here we'll have private static Axios instance of type of Axios instance, and I will have a public method to initialize the connection or configure the Axios instance. That's the proper way to call it. There's a create method in Axios where you can pass the default set of configuration, the default parameters for API connection, stuff like base URL. I know that in our case, our app is running locally on that port, and I know that because, well, where is it? Because this is the port in which we're running, right? In main.ts, in the src, in the backend folder. So this is the base configuration. And then I will define the methods for the integration with API. So the basic one is, of course, get, which is taking the URL to which we should connect. Be minded that this URL is only a partial URL that will be added to the base URL defined here. So I will just call API Axios instance get URL. And one thing that we might do here is check the type from TypeScript. As you can see, the type is the promise because it is asynchronous operation. Axios response of any. And the any here is actually kind of problematic because one of the reasons we're using TypeScript is to determine the types used in our app, right? So there has to be a way to change it. One thing is to add await here, of course. The second is to make that method generic, right? So the other method, the smarter one, using our abstraction, will have to define the response type for this. And then we can determine the types we're getting from the API upper in our function scope, higher in our function scope. The other one that we'd like to define here, definitely, is post method to create stuff. So let's create that. And this is the same case. I'd like to define the response type. This will get two things: URL, which is a string, and optionally, it should get data. For example, when I'd like to create something, the API. And the problem is, well, what should be the type for it? Should be unknown, object? Well, not really. We can define another type here, call it data type, and use it in here. And then this response type will define the type of the response we're getting from the API. And then the data type will define the type of data we are sending. So basically the type JSON structure of the body we're sending to our API. And we can just call it with API access instance post, find the response type. And then, am I doing this correctly? Data type. If that's the correct. Yeah, data is of data type. So this is good. Right? Okay. Where is it? Let me see. T and R, let's check. Actions response. Okay, looks good. Okay, and we have our API defined, at least a part of it for now. So now with that defined, we'd like to perform some kind of call to API. But before we can do this, we should initialize it. And the question is, where is a good place to initialize things in React? Well, I could go to app.tsx and initialize it here in use effect, right? Makes sense. But this isn't really something that should be triggered by an effect. It should be called just once. And this is a special case of something we can call preloading or pre-configuring stuff, meaning it will be ideal to have that configured before even React starts rendering, before it starts first render, before it starts working. So I like to preload something. And another example of that is maybe doing the check whether the user is authorized to your app before you start even rendering the first view to decide which view that should be, or maybe preloading some kind of data into your app and storing it somewhere so it's available to React immediately when it starts rendering. And we can do that going to index.tsx. What we can do here is call run app. And what is that? So this is the function I'll create right here for our preloading purposes, and be minded that this can be asynchronous, right? So you can definitely make it asynchronous and call some kind of preloading here. But all I want to do for my case is just call init to have the application initialized. Now I don't have to worry about this being called too late or the access instance not being created in the proper moment. Okay, so with that out of the way, in home, I will create home API yes, and create a simple function here. We will call it get games list. It's going to be asynchronous function. And let's see, we'll call API, come on, get, and the URL is just games response. Okay, and I'll export that, and this should allow us to perform the API call from our app to our backend. And you don't like that because that should be an object. We're not doing anything with this. We should add a wait here. Okay, let's try this. We'll use effect. And I know this should be called just once for now, so therefore the empty array as a dependency. And the problem with using the use effect is that there's get games list method, which is asynchronous, of course, in its nature. So let's see where we can just call it like this. Let's actually return that response just for fun. Should be okay. So I can call await here. I have to call it. Can I make it async here? Unfortunately not. I cannot mark this function inside an effect asynchronous. So how to solve that problem? Inside of here, I will call and create fetch games list function, which can be defined here as an asynchronous. So fetch games list, and this is asynchronous, no arguments. And for now, let's just log it. Response. Yeah, that's more like it. And let's see what happens. This is not URL. This is the one. Oh, there's an interesting problem. So we have an information here. Let me bump it up. That our XHR request to the API was blocked. Has been blocked by course. This is cross-origin resource sharing or request sharing. Cross-origin resource sharing, yes. Okay, and in a great simple example, right? This should be blocked. It's a term of security because I am making a request from one domain named like this to a domain named like this. Okay, and this is a special mechanism that will block the requests to the server from outside of its domain. Let me give you a simple example. If you have an API living on that domain, it can be requested by Facebook, because as you can see, they have the very same domain, right? Meaning there should be living on the same machine, or they are created by the same set of developers. Let's just say that to simplify things. But for example, if Wirtualna Polska.pl would like to request data from Facebook API, this request will be blocked because this is not a known domain for this API, right? And whenever you encounter that problem, remember one thing. There's nothing you can do in React, in your frontend app, to mitigate that problem. The only solution that can be provided by the backend team, the people that are able to change the backend code. So, knowing that, let's see how can we fix this. Let's go to, where is it? Here. And it seems that our header is wrong. So not only do we need the content type header, we also need, how do you call it? It should be here, access control allow origin header. Okay, so we can add that header here, and there are two values we can basically provide. If I change it to the domain that is actually performing the request, see where that works. Yeah, got that right. So we can whitelist this like that, or we can put an asterisk here to allow, this is a wildcard, to allow basically every single domain to receive data from that API. And since we will adding this a lot, and I don't want to repeat myself, in controller TS in utils, I will add another method, and I will call it get default headers, and that's going to return an object of that value. I can get rid of this and of this. Okay, and here I will just call get default headers, right? Because we basically want to, come on, add it everywhere. This, 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 this. Okay, looking good, I think. Oh, of course, here. Yeah. So now we have that configured, and we can receive answers from our API. So let's get back to our app, and this should be here. So let's check our answer again. What we can see here is the full answer with the headers, at least those that are meaningful and accessible via JavaScript. Configuration, status. The most important thing for me is data here. So I will return data, and that should be then available here as a games list here. And of course, to use it somehow, I have to store it in a state. So use state, I will set it to be null first. It's gonna be games and set games method. But I like to define type here. So what I will do is create new file in common and call it types, and here we'll have just one type. It'll be interface of a game. Should have an ID being a string, the name being a string, and the price as a number. And then I can use it here. It's a game or null. And why are we starting with null instead of empty array? The case may be that actually the data in the API is empty, and you will receive an empty array from the API. So just to distinguish between not having any data at the beginning and receiving an empty array, I decide to use null. So set games with a games list of type unknown, because we didn't pass any. This should be game array here, right? We have to pass that response type. Okay. Then here, this is a game list, and this is a game list too. Okay, now we're good. And what we can do is to stringify the games. Yeah, stringify the games here. And behold, we can see here is the data from our API. We can switch in the developer tools to network tab and see our call and our response. And also, if you can take a look at the response headers, you can see that access control allow origin is set to an asterisk, meaning every app basically can request the data. Okay, moving on. What I'd like to do now is to present our data, well, in some aesthetic fashion, something that is actually looking kind of good. So I will import a few things from Material UI. So this is gonna be a typography from Material UI core typography. And I will get rid of that and that, and just start with a wonderful title. I can provide a different variants here to get the different type of typography. This is going to be H1. Let's say games. Okay, looking good. Font family is Roboto. This is good. Maybe let's remove the, yeah, this is looking fine. What we have here is a kind of like simple table data, right? I would like to present a list of staff, and table is one of the approaches we can use. So let's try that. Let's import table. Import it. No, not really. Let's import that. Then I believe what we need is, oh no, we first need some padding and offset, so the table container should be first. And this should be just table. Then we have, of course, the table head and table body. Then we have a table row. And inside of that row, we have cells. So table cell, the one with the ID, the one with the name, and the one with price. Yeah, makes sense. And maybe the one with special actions. Okay, so in the table body, I'll take the games. We'll check where games actually exist, because at the very start they can be new, and then I will map over these, and we will return a table row, and here we will use table cell. We need to provide a key, and I assume that the ID is unique, as it should be with the most of the APIs. And let's see, we need game ID. We need game name. We need game price. And here we need something special. And this is going to be icon button. Yeah, icon button. And what we need to define here is, I don't really remember. Let's see. Why icon button? What I'd like to do here is to use the icon button like this to delete the games from API. So let's grab that. Okay. This is like this. The icon button, we need to import that. And there's the delete icon. And what I believe what we have to do is add the package. Oh, you don't see me typing here. It's horrible. Material UI icons. Let's see, just to avoid that issue, future, I will move myself out of the way. Come on. Okay, see where we can use it now. No suggestions, cool. But we can sort this out. Let's see. There's a difference between that kind of import and that kind of import, but it's out of the scope. Let's see. From material icons, could you give me the lead? The lead icon? Oh, it's just the lead now. Okay, cool. And this should compile, I hope, and it should work, right? Or maybe I'm wrong. Still compiling. Run it again. No, we don't need that. Okay, it's trying. And since I've been rambling for about 46 minutes, if this works, I believe this, yeah. Okay, cool. Maybe just we can style it a little bit better. Right. So well, we'll leave out the styling for the second part, but here is how you can display the data from the API in nice table. What we can do though is to use that global class. So the app class, I believe. Yeah, and add a little bit of padding, say 24. So it's not so sticky to the edges. Yeah, looks good. Not doing anything yet with that, but we'll continue in the next episode, and I believe, well, this might be a long one, maybe even 3 episodes. We'll see. So thank you. Comment, like, share, and subscribe. Let me know what other things you'd like to see about React or backend development. I have other things planned for this channel, for example, Flutter tutorials or connection to the real database with stuff like NodeJS. I'll see you in the next one. So goodbye.